what came up around this question of how do we create post-capitalist futures, where to begin. Can also just be a single point. Yeah, Inat, hi.
Hello. Yeah, I think we had a interesting conversation. I mean, I was stressing that, I mean, I was listening a lot the whole day that, I mean, to think of a post-capitalist reality, we really have to address the controlling elite that actually, how can we, I mean, cut off the relation to that control? How can we resist to that domination, which is global, that is, you can see its manifestation in on a national level, but it's really something. I mean, we know that the world is taken over by the few, and how we in our locality can disconnect from that. How can we fight against it? How can we can dismantle it? Who are those powers? Who are those forces? And how can I say no to them? I miss a bit this kind of I don't know, resistance. At the same time, Patrick was saying that the change is there, is as big, probably from as the let's say the radicalization towards the right, for example. There's a lot of initiatives that are happening that are more under the radar, but for him there is a lot going on, there's a lot happening. So yeah, it was interesting to discuss together.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, Maria.
Oh, yeah, just a few minutes, and so many things came up. I heard about an earlier session where one of the things was about mutual aid, and that seems to be something that we've got used to. The NHS, fire service, education, we take for granted that we share those resources, but actually we've got to get much better, maybe working like families do, not waiting for perfect, but just making the decisions we can and then going along with it because we're in the family more than we're in one side or other of the argument. Something about the other parts of today being listening and relationships with one another, knowing enough about each other to understand our stories, finding and spreading good news, because I don't think good news is reported. These kind of things where communities are helping each other probably don't make mainstream media, because look, stuff happened and it was really beautiful, is not as dramatic as shit happened and whatever. That's where my head went with the help of some other discussions. Thank you, Tim.
Nice, thank you. Maybe one more voice or one or two. There's a wish. Yeah, Afrim.
Yeah, I missed the first part of the presentation, but I think it is relevant. The book I read is a science fiction book by Margie Pierce, and it's called Women on the Edge of Tomorrow. And it talks about that the present day is dystopian and the future is utopian. So there's like a dystopian present where women are in insane asylums, and there's a utopian future where everybody works in gardens and LGBTI rights are respected. But there's like 100 years time difference between the present day and the future day in this book. But it's like a feminist classic. So it's a very interesting read, I think. Well, that's all I want to say.
Thanks for the recommendation. So if one more wants to go.
Yes. Hello. I was.
Hi.
Hello. Do I need to put my hand up?
No, I
It's
was just looking who's talking. There you are.
Okay, yeah. Kushla. I imagine village life. I live in a village at the moment, but I imagine that we could move towards turning our neighbourhoods into villages. And there was that concept of the 15-minute city, whole different town planning and people could carpool to do their shopping and all share skills and whatever in their little neighbourhoods and become a village. And develop those village type relationships. But that concept of the 15-minute city was smashed by propaganda straight away. The conspiracy theories that came up about that was incredible. That I saw some that it was all about control and you'd be locked in and all sorts of crazy things. So we have to get past that kind of propaganda machinery that's out there. But yeah, that would be my image of post-capitalism. It's local. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that resonates with me. Well, good to hear from you. I'm happy to hear that these conversations have been enriching. And I would also just add a few more points into this conversation. I'm trying to get my light right. Yeah. So before kind of zooming into like what we can do, I would just actually zoom out a little bit and look at this whole question from more of a larger, let's say, systemic perspective, which has to do with this view of what are actually systems. Like, what are we when we approach systemic change? What are we actually talking about, right? So systems can be described as these complex, dynamic, adaptive, self-organizing entities. And not only do they exist kind of in economy and culture, but also an ecosystem functions that way. There is something where a forest is more than the sum of its trees. There is an overall dynamic that arises through the interactions of different beings according to a particular logic that creates a dynamic that can't be reduced to any single parts. So a forest is much more resilient to environmental shocks, has much more capacity of adaptation than a monoculture, for example. And that has to do with these reciprocal relationships that maintain the whole thing. But also when we look at the societal systems that we create, we find this dynamic where we just cannot seem to change the system through, modulating parts of it, reforming here, not even overthrowing a state because it's a global system, or just some small alternative niches. So from looking at these self-organizing capacities of the systems, which also have to do with them being hell-bent to double down on achieving their purpose when they're confronted with their own contradictions and challenged and pushed to the edge and threatened in its survival. there's an understanding that I no longer seek leverage points for systemic change through, reform within the system, electoral politics, or even reactive activism alone. My kind of starting point is really like we need to build and embody a different system. And also going back to kind of what I showed with the slides before of the iceberg, of just looking at the deeper layers, the deeper logics, the deeper relational dynamics that maintain capitalism, seeing how much capitalism has become deeply embedded in culture. My understanding is that post-capitalism is far more than just an economic system. It's a different culture altogether. And so my kind of understanding of post-capitalism is that of creating a different type of culture. And I will share a slide again at this point. To kind of look a little bit into when we speak of culture, like what are we actually talking about, right? And culture can be described as the total like habit energy, Buddhists maybe would say, that you find in any collective. So it's not the thing that we speak, that we demand, that we pretend to be doing. It's the things that we're actually doing. It's all our habits combined. And then there is this observation that culture is maintained or consists of these different layers that need to work together, that need to be coherent with each other for the whole thing to work. And so this is what the slide is about, that yes, of course, like it's the systems, it's the ways we make these decisions, it's the way that we distribute resources, how information flows, how feedback flows, how conflict is managed. But that is deeply related to our relationships, interpersonal, ecological, biospheric, cosmic, like how we, the ways that we relate. And that also has to do with our worldview, our metaphysics, our ontology. So the ways that we see being, the way that we conceive of knowledge, aesthetics, what we see as beautiful, political philosophy, how we see power should be distributed. So in capitalism, we see that the logic of accumulation and profit in the system is mirrored by a logic of fear and transactionalism in the relationships, and is mirrored by a worldview in which basically we live in a random universe that is just material, where the only conscious thing is kind of the human brain, right? And then, of course, and where we end after death. So in such a worldview, of course, it makes sense that the purpose of life should be material accumulation. If instead our worldview is one of enchantment, of the world is a mystery, is conscious, we are part of a community of a huge diversity of different sentient beings, where our health and our happiness depends on taking care of the others. We will cultivate other relationships that are much more based on care, on solidarity and reciprocity, and logically create systems that reflect this sort of relational logic. And I bring this also because when we look at how societal change is often imagined, we find projects that will focus very strongly on one, at most two of these pillars. So we find like many political, economic initiatives obviously focus on the systems, which is super important. But then they will often be undermined by the patriarchal logics of their relationships, of an either-or competitive power-over paradigm that undermines, let's say, a solidarity economy. Or the other way around, we can create a spiritual community and focus on healing our relationships, healing the trauma. But if we don't have other agreements for how we make decisions and resource flow and information flow, very likely those agreements will be implicit and will come from the cultures that people are coming from. So whatever of these pillars we are not building, we will probably be inheriting from dominant culture. But on the good, let's say on the positive side, when initiatives, communities, movements can create coherence, can create an approach where we work on these three layers simultaneously and create a foundation where those three are coherent with each other, we're actually seeing a different self-organizing dynamic. The same effect that we see in ecosystems, in societal systems. It doesn't have to start huge, but it needs to be coherent. It needs to be aligned. So that's kind of like a possible approach into cultural change, into embodying post-capitalism as well. I will actually jump back just to the iceberg here and also say that, we are doing this after 500 years of capitalism and coloniality, after 5,000 years or more of patriarchy. So we cannot simply kind of escape the deep imprints of those systems. And there's often like a fallacy in thinking in alternative spaces that we can just create kind of alternative realities outside of these systems and we will not be caught, and then we are confused and wondering why it is that only like white middle class people show up in these spaces. So there is something of if we are not to the extent that we are not willing, especially those of us that carry more privilege and more power, are unwilling to look at the ways that we've been conditioned by existing systems of oppression, the alternative spaces we create will likely be shaped and undermined in unintentional and unconscious ways. So I see it really as like the two legs with which we walk. One leg is the conscious dismantling, hospicing, outgrowing, metabolizing of those systems, which has to do with profound work in reflecting both individually and on a systems and group level of how have we been socialized into these logics. Also on a somatic level, understanding how and feeling and embodying differently of how patriarchy, white supremacy, for example, not only function in the conscious mind, but really in the nervous system responses, in flight, fight, freeze responses to perceived danger. There's a deep hierarchical groove that the society that most of us have been conditioned into kind of molds into our nervous systems. And so we need kind of politicized co-regulation to open up other forms of possibility. I have only 3 minutes left, so let's go forward. But then the other, I will just skip this forward. The other is the conscious creation of different systems. I created a slide here that it's probably the last thing I'll be able to say because I'm running out of time. That is in part inspired by Miki Kashtan's work of the Nonviolent Global Liberation Collective. So she speaks of these 5 systems that exist in every group, in every society, even every individual. And then I've kind of defined those kind of for myself of like, what does it look like in the power over paradigm, and what could it look like in the power with paradigm? Yeah, so how can we understand the agreements that currently exist, because even if we're not conscious, they exist, and then align them towards our vision and our values. And then maybe that is the last thing also, because I know Pat was just here before, so I think I will just end it here, which is that for me, on a larger, and you could say even spiritual and metaphysical level, post-capitalism, and that is a point of hope as well, is actually in the alignment with the larger kind of complex dynamic self-organizing entity that we are part of, which is really the biosphere, or you could say Gaia Earth. So also coming from a recognition that we are not alone in this place. The matter of society is not just something that we as human beings alone figure out. And in fact, the societies that have been most sustainable have been societies that were not anthropocentric, that were not centered around human beings alone, but around an understanding of the need for care for the whole community of life. So there's this amazing line, two amazing quotes here. One from David Abrams from The Spell of the Censures, saying, "We're human only in contact and in conviviality with what is not human." And then Pat McCabe's line, that for me, when I first heard this, was so mind-blowing, that culture isn't a human construct. Culture is the Mother Earth expressing herself through humans at any given place. So what does it mean to step into this consciousness, into right relationship, into service? Yeah, and I'll leave it here. It's we're at the full hour. I hope this served you, gave you some starting points. Yeah, thank you so much for being here, for listening.
Thank you, Martin. I also really appreciate the format in which you proposed this so that everyone could also look into the inquiry for themselves in this non-hierarchical way. It was very in practice of what the last slide was actually saying. So appreciating that. And for anyone
Thank
who
you.
wants to continue the conversation, there is the Festival Connection space that you can head over to. That's open, I think, until around about 9, I think. I could be wrong, but I think so. Yes, Ariana's nodding at me. Martin's up for heading over there for a little bit.
Yeah.
And so if you do want to continue with this, then you can head over there. And thank you all for your presence and participation. And
Amazing.
yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you. Thanks,
Ariana.
Annabelle and Ariana, for the tech support and the hosting. Bye
Goodbye.
bye.